My father said, keeping busy for 30 years. His estate attorney told me to sit down before she opened the folder. Now I understand why. I am 44 years old, a corporate attorney in Chicago, and I have spent the better part of 2 decades being proud of the distance between where I live and where I'm from. My condo is in Lincoln Park. 12th floor, north-facing windows, a view that on clear days gives me a thin blue stripe of Lake Michigan if I stand at just the right angle in the kitchen. I have suits I paid real money for. I have a parking spot in a building where the parking spots cost more per month than my father's first property purchase, though I didn't know that yet. I make $194,000 a year arguing other people's problems in front of judges, who call me Mr. Kowalski with the specific neutrality of people who have learned to respect the name on the letterhead regardless of its origins. My origins are Delwood, Indiana. Population 4,100. 1 stoplight. A grain elevator visible from every street in town, a landmark so constant it stops registering as a landmark and becomes just part of the sky. I go back twice a year, Thanksgiving and my father's birthday in June. I stay 2 nights maximum. I tell myself this is a function of my schedule, my caseload, the genuine demands of a career that doesn't pause gracefully. I have been telling myself this for 15 years. I have mostly believed it. My father's name was Edmund Kowalski. Ed to everyone who knew him. He was 74 years old and he died on a Tuesday in November, heart attack, no warning, the doctor told me it was fast, and I have held on to those words, it was fast, like they are something I can spend. I drove from Chicago to Delwood in 3 hours and 40 minutes. Faster than I have ever made that drive. I did not stop for coffee. I did not stop at all. I sat with his body before they took him and I held his hand. Rough, calloused, the hands of a man who used them every day of his life as the primary instrument of everything he built, and I felt something crack open in my chest that I still don't have the right word for. I'm a lawyer. I work in language. I don't have the word. Let me tell you about the truck. Kowalski Contracting, painted on the side in faded blue letters. He drove that truck my entire childhood. By the time I was in high school, the blue had faded to something closer to gray, and I spent a considerable amount of adolescent energy hoping that my friends wouldn't see it parked in front of our house. We lived on Sycamore Street, 3 bedrooms, half-acre lot, a house my father had built himself, which I also did not fully appreciate until it was too late to tell him so. We were comfortable but not more than comfortable. New school clothes in September, used everything else. Vacations meant loading into that truck and driving somewhere within 4 hours. State parks, my mother's cousin in Columbus, one summer a campground in Michigan that my father insisted was basically the same as a real lake. It was not basically the same as a real lake, but I ate 4 hot dogs that trip and my father laughed more than I remembered him laughing at home, and I have not thought about that trip in 25 years until this moment. He worked constantly. Left before I woke up, came home with sawdust on his clothes, ate dinner, watched the news, went to bed. He was not an absent father in any meaningful sense. He was at my games. He helped with homework with the focused patience of a man who approaches problems methodically, but he was a quiet one. He said what needed saying and stopped. He thought silence was neutral, I think. He didn't understand that children read silence as everything. I was smart and ambitious and desperate to leave. Indiana University on a partial scholarship, Northwestern Law, a job in Chicago that felt, when I took it, like breaking the atmosphere. My father came to both graduations. He wore his best shirt to each, a blue Oxford I recognized from church Sundays, and he shook hands with my professors and my colleagues with the specific dignity of a man who knows he is out of his element and refuses to show it. I was proud of my degree. I was ashamed of his shirt. I have not forgiven myself for the order of those feelings, but I have also not been honest enough about them until now. We talked on Sundays. He asked about my cases, my apartment, the city, careful questions, listening questions, the questions of someone who is genuinely interested and has learned not to impose. When I asked how things were going on his end, he said, keeping busy. That was always the answer. Keeping busy. I heard small jobs, maintenance contracts, the ordinary diminishing work of a rural contractor getting older in a town that was slowly losing population. I filed it under fine and moved on to other topics. I am 44 years old and I did not ask follow-up questions, and my father is dead and I am going to have to live with that fact for the rest of my life, and I have decided that living with it honestly is the only thing I can do with it now. Update 1. 3 days after the funeral. The estate attorney's name is Margaret Sollers. She has practiced in Delwood for 31 years, she knew my father personally, and she has a folder on her desk that is considerably thicker than I expected. Your father asked me to walk you through this myself, she says. She slides the folder across the desk. He said, and I'm quoting directly, make sure the boy sits down first. I am already sitting. I look at the folder. I open it. My father owned 7 properties. I read that sentence 3 times. Then I read the details. 7 properties, purchased between 1993 and 2021. All bought distressed, vacant, or in foreclosure. All renovated personally. My father's hands, my father's tools, the faded blue Kowalski contracting truck parked in front of each one through whatever winters the renovation required. All currently rented or recently sold, proceeds held in trust. Here is what was in the folder. 112, Birch Street, Delwood, a 3-bedroom Craftsman, purchased in 1993 for $14,000 at foreclosure, renovated over 2 years, rented currently at $875 per month. Current value, $187,000. My father paid $14,000 for it when I was 11 years old, and I never knew it existed. 7, County Road 400N, 40 acres outside Delwood, a farmhouse, purchased in 1997 for $31,000. The farmhouse renovated, the land leased annually to a neighboring farmer. Current value, $294,000. 334, Main Street, Millfield, a mixed-use building in the neighboring town. Ground floor commercial, 2 apartments above. Purchased in 2001 for $22,000, abandoned, partial fire damage. Fully rebuilt. Current value, $318,000. 89, Elm Avenue, Delwood, a 2-bedroom bungalow, purchased in 2006 for $18,500 at an estate sale with no heirs. Renovated, rented at $750 per month for 14 years, recently sold. Proceeds in trust, $161,000. 15, Industrial Drive, Delwood, a small commercial warehouse, purchased in 2009 for $27,000 during a business closure. Leased to a local HVAC company at $1,400 per month. Current value, $198,000. 221, Oak Street, Delwood, a 4-bedroom Victorian, purchased in 2014 for $41,000. Condemned at purchase, structural issues, neighbors thought he was out of his mind. Renovated over 4 years. Current value, $276,000. 8, Lakeview Drive, Millfield, a 3-bedroom ranch on a small lake, purchased in 2021 for $67,000. Renovation nearly complete at time of death. Current value as is, $198,000. Estimated post-completion, $267,000. Total portfolio value, $2,093,000. Cash in trust from the Elm Avenue sale, $161,000. Monthly rental income across active properties, $3,025. I look at these numbers for a long time. Margaret Sollers lets me look. She doesn't speak. I understand later that she has done this before, sat across from the children of people she knew, watched them recalibrate, given them the silence the moment required. She is a good attorney and a decent person, and my father trusted her for 31 years, and I understand why. I say, he never told me. She says, no, he didn't. I say, why? She opens to a page near the back of the folder. Handwritten letter. My father's handwriting, careful block letters, the deliberate penmanship of a man who learned to write legibly because job sites and contracts require it. She slides it across. If you're reading this, then I'm gone and Margaret is walking you through the folder. I told her to make sure you sit down. I know you worked hard for what you have. I know Chicago wasn't an accident. You earned it. I'm proud of you in ways I wasn't good at saying out loud. That's on me. I started buying the houses because I knew how to fix things, and I kept seeing things that needed fixing and nobody was doing it. That's all it was at first. Then it became something I liked. Then it became something I was good at. You know how that goes. You're a lawyer, you know what it feels like when something fits. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to think I was asking for anything. You had your life. I had mine. Mine turned out to have more in it than I let on. The properties are yours. All of them. Do what you want with them. Sell them if you want. The numbers are the numbers. Keep them if you want. Margaret can connect you with the property manager I used. The Victorian on Oak Street took me 4 years. I want you to see it before you decide anything. Just see it. Drive safe. Dad. I fold the letter. Put it in my jacket pocket, against my chest. Sit with it for a moment. Then I say to Margaret Sollers, can you take me to the Victorian? Update 2. The Victorian. 221, Oak Street is the most beautiful house on its block. It may be the most beautiful house in Delwood. I stand in front of it on a cold November afternoon, 4 days after my father's funeral, and I understand for the first time that I did not know my father. He bought it condemned. Structurally compromised, the county had tagged it, the previous owners had abandoned it rather than face the cost of repair. The neighbors, Margaret tells me this, driving over, thought he was losing it. Here was Ed Kowalski, 68 years old, buying a condemned Victorian in a town that was losing population, parking that truck out front through 4 winters, working alone on weekends. What was he doing? What was the point? The point is visible from the sidewalk. The porch has been rebuilt from original plans he found at the County Historical Society. I learned this later from the property manager, who knew him well and has the kind of detailed memory for my father's projects that I should have developed and didn't. The porch is correct in the way that only research makes things correct. The proportions, the turned posts, the railing profile, all of it matches what the house was designed to be in 1887, when it was built by a family whose name is on a plaque he had made at his own expense and mounted by the door. Inside, the current tenants are away for the week. The property manager lets me in. I am not prepared. The floors are refinished to a warmth that reads as original because my father researched the original finish and matched it. He found a supplier in Cincinnati for the stain, I learn later from his notes, which Margaret has in the folder. He tested it on scrapboards for 3 months before he touched the actual floors. The crown molding in the front room is continuous, unbroken, mitered at the corners with a precision that I, who know nothing about carpentry, can nonetheless recognize as the product of someone who did not rush. He cut it himself. He installed it himself. The staircase banister is turned wood, each post individually shaped on a lathe he kept in his garage in Delwood, the garage I walked past every time I came home for Thanksgiving and never went into because I had decided it was just a garage. It was not just a garage. It was where my father made things. I walk through every room. I take my time. I am a corporate attorney in a good coat, and I walk through every room of a Victorian in Delwood, Indiana that my father bought condemned and spent 4 years rebuilding with his own hands, and I cry in the upstairs hallway. Not dramatically. Not for long. About 4 minutes, maybe 5. I stand at the window that looks out over the street and I let it happen, and then I stop and I look out at Oak Street below, the bare November trees, a neighbor walking a dog, the ordinary quiet of a Tuesday afternoon in a small Indiana town, and I feel something reorganize itself inside me that has been arranged incorrectly for a very long time. He wrote, "The Victorian took me 4 years. I want you to see it before you decide anything." He knew what it would do. He knew I would stand in that upstairs hallway and finally see him. He planned it. My father, who built things with his hands and kept his own counsel and said keeping busy for 30 years, planned one final reveal with a precision he brought to everything else he ever built. He wanted me to see it after he was gone because he thought I would see it more clearly that way. He was right. He was, as it turns out, almost always right about things I was too busy escaping to notice. Update 3, the inventory, and the tenant on Birch Street. I take 2 months before making any decisions about the portfolio. My father's letter said see the Victorian first. I saw it. Now I see everything else. I drive to every property. I walk through each one slowly, the way I walk through a case file when I'm preparing for something important, looking for what's there and what's missing and what the structure tells me that the documents don't. I meet the tenants. I look at the condition of things. My father maintained everything meticulously. Every property is in better shape than I expected. The tenants, several of whom have been there for years, in 2 cases for over a decade, speak about him with the warmth of people who were treated fairly and understood that this was not guaranteed and were grateful for it. The tenant at 112 Birch Street is a woman named Dorothy Haynes, 71 years old, who has lived in the Craftsman for 19 years. She makes me coffee. She shows me the window my father replaced 3 winters ago when a branch came through it. He was there the day after she called, she tells me, and he replaced it with a better window than the original. She shows me the porch he reinforced 2 summers ago, unprompted, because he had noticed the boards beginning to soften and he didn't want her to have to ask. She says, "Your father fixed things before I had to ask. In 19 years, I never had to ask twice." I write this down in the small notebook I've been carrying since the estate meeting. I write down a lot of things in the 2 months I spend learning his portfolio. I am building a case file on my father. It is the most important case file I have ever assembled, and I am the only audience, and there is no argument I'm preparing, just the record of what he actually was, which is different from what I thought he was, which was different from what I let myself see. The county road property on 400N. I drive out there on a gray December morning, the field stripped and flat in every direction, the farmhouse sitting square at the end of a gravel drive. The farmer who leases the land is named Curtis Vogel, 58, and he worked with my father for 11 years. He shakes my hand at the end of the lane and walks me out through the dormant field and tells me that my father knew more about soil drainage than most farmers he'd met, that he'd done research into it because he wanted to understand what the land needed before he drew up the lease terms, that he'd been fair on the lease price when he didn't have to be because, and Curtis uses my father's own words here, Land should be worked by people who know how to work it, not held by people who can afford to let it sit. I add this to the file. At the Millfield Commercial Building, the ground floor tenant is a small insurance agency that has been there for 8 years. The owner tells me my father added a half bath to the back of the unit in 2019 at his own expense, no rent increase, because he thought it was something the space needed and the tenant shouldn't have to carry the cost. He just showed up one April, the owner says, told me what he was going to do, and did it. Took him 2 weekends. I am building a picture of a man who made decisions based on what was right and what was needed and what his skills could provide, in that order, without reference to what he would get back. This is not how I make decisions. I am aware of this. I am beginning to think about it. Update 4. The decision and the education. I keep the portfolio. All of it. This is not sentimentality, though sentiment is present. It is the decision that makes the most sense when I look at what he built, the condition of the properties, the stability of the income, the quality of the tenants and the relationships he cultivated with them. My father did not build sentimental things. He built things that worked. Keeping them is the correct response to what he built. I hire the property manager he used, a man named Gary Pruitt who has managed the active rentals for 6 years and knows each property the way you know something you've been responsible for. I establish a maintenance fund. I begin to learn, through Gary and through the files my father kept, meticulous files, stored in a fireproof cabinet in the Birch Street property, organized by address and date, what each building needs and when and why. I fly to Delwood once a month. I stay 2 nights minimum, sometimes 3. I am done with 2-night maximums. There is too much to learn and too much to see, and I have wasted enough visits treating Delwood as a place to pass through. The Lakeview Drive Ranch is 85% complete at my father's death. I finish it. Not alone, I hire his crew, the 3 men who worked with Kowalski Contracting for years, men who knew my father and who treat me with a patience I don't entirely deserve when I show up on weekends in work clothes I bought at the hardware store in Millfield, attempting to be useful. I am not immediately useful. I become more useful. I learn to do things with my hands that I did not know I could do. I pull wire, I hang drywall, I learn to tape seams from a man named Raymond who has been doing it for 30 years and who tells me I have reasonably good hands for a lawyer, which is the highest compliment I have received in some time. The ranch sells 4 months after the estate transfer, for $261,000. I put the proceeds into a renovation fund. I have already begun looking at distressed properties in and around Millfield. There is a commercial building on Garfield Street that has been vacant for 3 years. I make an appointment with the owner. The crew still calls the company Kowalski Contracting. The truck is in the garage on Birch Street. I haven't changed the signage on anything. I am not sure I will. Update 5. His birthday, June. My father's first birthday after his death falls on a warm Saturday in June. The Indiana fields already loud with insects at 9 in the morning, the kind of early summer heat that sits on you rather than pressing. I drive to the cemetery in Delwood. I bring nothing. My father thought flowers at graves were a waste of money. He never said this directly, but I am inferring it from a lifetime of his practicality and I feel certain I'm right. I sit on the ground next to the headstone, Edmund R. Kowalski, 1949 to 2023, he built things, and I talk. Not dramatically. Not with the eloquence of someone who has prepared remarks. Just talk, the way I should have talked on Sunday phone calls when he said keeping busy and I said that's good, Dad, and moved the conversation along because I had already decided I understood his life and didn't need more information. I tell him about the Victorian, which he already knows. I tell him about Dorothy Haynes on Birch Street, who still calls the property manager whenever she needs something, who told me last month that the window he replaced is the best-fitting window in the house. I tell him about Raymond, who thinks I have reasonably good hands. I tell him about the Garfield Street building, which I am under contract to purchase for $29,000, which was a warehouse for a printing company that closed in 2020, which has good bones and bad everything else and which I am going to spend the next 2 years learning how to fix. I tell him about the truck. I apologize for the truck. Not for long. He was not a man who needed long apologies. An extended apology would be its own kind of self-indulgence, making him listen to my guilt when he's not here to wave it away the way he would have, with a short exhale and a change of subject. I keep it brief. I acknowledge it. I say, I was a kid who didn't understand what I was looking at, and I'm sorry, and I understand it now, and I'm going to try to do something worthy of what you built. He doesn't answer. He's not there. I am aware that I am talking to a headstone in a cemetery in Delwood, Indiana, and that he is not here to receive any of this, and that this is in fact the entire problem. Everything I understand now is understanding I arrived at too late to give him while he could hear it. But I say it anyway. Because the record matters even when the audience is gone. I drive home. Take the highway north at first, back toward the Indiana-Illinois border, the familiar route I have made twice a year for 15 years. Then, somewhere around the state line, I take an exit. I find the county roads. Slower. Through the fields. The corn knee-high in June, stretching to the horizon in every direction, everything flat and green and enormous in the specific way of the Midwest that you stop seeing if you spend too long in cities with skylines. I drive through it at the speed of someone who is not in a hurry to be somewhere else, and I think about my father driving these same roads in the Kowalski contracting truck, moving between properties, between jobs, between the things he was building in a town most people were leaving. He was not leaving. He never left. He stayed and he built, and the buildings are still standing. Resolution. I'm going to tell you where the numbers are now, because my father was a man who respected numbers, and I have learned to present them the way he would have, without inflation, without unnecessary drama, just the accurate accounting. At the time of inheritance, $2,093,000 in property, $161,000 cash in trust, $3,025 per month in rental income, zero outstanding debt on any property. He paid everything off. Every property, free and clear. He did this on the income of a rural contractor in a small Indiana town over 30 years, and he did it without telling anyone because he wasn't doing it for anyone to see. 1 year later, the Lakeview Drive Ranch sold for $261,000. 6 remaining properties, current estimated value $1,910,000. The Garfield Street warehouse in Millfield purchased for $29,000, renovation underway, added to portfolio. Monthly rental income now $4,125 with a new commercial lease from the HVAC company that renewed on Birch Street. Net worth increase from the inheritance alone, in 12 months, approximately $340,000. My father, who said keeping busy for 30 years, gave me an inheritance that grew by $340,000 in the first year I held it. Because he built things that worked. Because he maintained them correctly. Because he treated his tenants fairly and they stayed. I am 45 years old. I still practice law in Chicago. I drive to Delwood once a month in a car that is considerably nicer than my father's truck and considerably less interesting. I have started to think about what moving back would mean. I have not decided. I am thinking. My father was not a man who rushed decisions, and I am trying to learn from him in the ways that remain available to me. The Victorian at 221 Oak Street is fully occupied. The tenants keep it well. I walk through it when I'm in town, with their permission, and I stand in the upstairs hallway for a minute each time, not crying anymore, just standing, just being in the space he made, and I look out the window at Oak Street and I think about 4 years of that truck parked out front, my father working alone in a condemned building in a small town, the neighbors skeptical, the project invisible to anyone who might have cared about him if they'd known to look. He did not need them to look. He needed the building to be right. My father drove a truck with his name on the side and built $2.1 million in real estate in a town most people were leaving. I was ashamed of the truck. I was a child, then an adolescent, then a young man in such a hurry to be somewhere else that I could not see what the truck was doing, where it was going, what it was building. I am 45 years old and I own that truck now. I kept it, it's in the garage on Birch Street. I start the engine once a month to keep the battery alive, and I am not sure I will ever drive it on the road, but I am certain I will never sell it, and I understand now what the name on the side meant. It meant, I built this. It meant, this is mine. It meant, I am here, I am working, I am making something out of what other people walked away from. I spent 20 years in a profession that puts your name on a door and calls it success. My father put his name on a truck and drove it to 7 properties for 30 years and never mentioned it to the son, who might have been proud of him, if the son had been paying attention. I don't know which one of us had the better understanding of what success actually is. I think I am beginning to find out. He wrote, mine turned out to have more in it than I let on. He wrote, I didn't want you to think I was asking for anything. My father was worth $2 million in real estate and spent 30 years making sure I didn't feel any obligation toward him, making sure his wealth was invisible so that my life could be unencumbered, making sure that when I was ashamed of the truck, I was only ashamed of the truck and not also weighted down by the knowledge of what the truck was doing. That is not humility. Humility is the absence of pride. What my father had was something more specific, a love that expressed itself through labor and silence and the deliberate withholding of information that might have changed the dynamics between us. He wanted me to be my own thing. He was going to be his own thing. He trusted that eventually we would find each other properly. He ran out of time for that part. So did I. But I have the properties, and I have the letter, and I have Dorothy Haynes on Birch Street who never had to ask twice, and I have Raymond who thinks I have reasonably good hands, and I have a warehouse on Garfield Street in Millfield with good bones and bad everything else that I am learning, one weekend at a time, how to fix. I drive to Delwood once a month. I stay as long as it takes. I am done with 2-night maximums. Done with the whole architecture of managed distance, I spent 2 decades constructing to protect myself from a place that turns out to have been worth understanding. There is too much left to learn, and he is not here to teach it directly, and the only way left to learn it is to do what he did. Show up, look at what needs fixing, understand the bones before you touch the surface, and get to work. The truck is in the garage. The name is on the side. Some mornings when I'm in Delwood, I walk out there and look at it. The faded blue letters, the particular silence of a vehicle that spent 30 years going somewhere important while I wasn't paying attention, and I stay for a while. Not doing anything. Just staying. My father would say that's wasted time. My father would also understand exactly why I do it. That's the thing about knowing someone after they're gone. You get to hold both truths at once. You get to know them completely, finally, in the specific and irreversible way of too late. And you find, if you're lucky, that what you find is worth the grief of the finding. I found a man who built things with his hands and kept his own counsel and loved his son in the way available to him, which was not the way his son needed at the time but was, it turns out, enough. It turns out, more than enough.